We've really talked about a lot of the concept, like after really understanding what this science of learning might look like, feels like, that we talked about also some of the concepts that are useful for teachers. Is there anything else you wanted to add on that front in terms of what the teachers needs to be aware of through this process?
I think it's quite helpful. I think one of the important things that Catania came up with was a way of looking at the different way that we get involved in situations. Well, I first came across this in the 1980s when I was in Japan. He gave a seminar there, and he talked about seeing us as having what he called a self and a psyche. And he actually had other aspects. He talked about the soma, sort of the bodies we have, or the undead, the bodies we have. But he talked in particular about the mind in terms of a division between a self and a psyche. And at the time, this seemed very exotic to me, of the idea of splitting up the mind. And then gradually, as time has gone on, I've realized that it's a very standard psychological gambit. When people are trying to understand the mind, it's clear that we don't engage with situations in exactly the same way all the time. Sometimes we come quite fresh and alert and whatever, and sometimes we come to situations in a very different mental state. Mm-hmm. And so you've got Freud dividing the mind up into the ego, the superego, the id, whatever else it is. Anyway, what I've discovered is that Gattegno's division into the self and the psyche as two ways of engaging with situations, two different ways of engaging with situations, is absolutely mainstream, except that it's never been applied to education. Mm. Now, I'm sure that some of the people who are watching this broadcast will have come across Daniel Kahneman, who wrote a book called Thinking, Fast and Slow. Kahneman was a psychologist who won the Nobel Prize for Economics, slightly bizarrely, because his ideas, and he took ideas from psychology and applied them to how real human beings make economic decisions, economic in a wide sense, but make decisions which have some sort of economic and social consequences. So he wrote this book called Thinking, Fast and Slow. And the fast and slow aspects of it correspond to exactly what Gattegno was talking about in terms of the psyche and the self. Now, Kahneman actually wasn't original in the sense of dividing thinking up in these two different ways. There's been a long tradition of this. And typically it's called dual process models of the mind. So two ways in which the mind might process the world around it, dual process models of the mind. And typically now they're referred to as system 1 and system 2. That's one nomenclature that people use. But and it's a very productive way of looking at all sorts of aspects of economics and other things. But nobody's applied it to education, except of course one person has, and that was Gattegno, and he was doing it from the 1950s onwards, and very productively. And he worked out what are the characters when I'm in contact with the situation and myself, the particular process of my mind that is actually engaging with the situation is myself. What are the characteristics which I bring to this situation? And what are the human characteristics which I bring to this situation? And they include things like presence and awareness and the ability to suspend judgment and sensitivity and vulnerability and a whole range of other things that are absolutely human attributes that we can find in ourselves, but more importantly, we know exist in our students. These are our endowment as humans. And at the same time, there's another way of engaging with the world, which Gattegno called the psyche, and which is called system 1 in the dual process models of mind way of looking at things, which is how can I engage with the world in an automatic way? So we don't always want to having to be completely when I'm walking, I just want to walk. I want to do other things. I don't particularly want to be having aware of every footstep. There has to be a part of me which deals with the world in an automatic, previously learned way. And this is the psyche. Now, of course, in a class, most of the time, we would actually want our students to be dealing with new material with their self at the helm, to use Gattegno's expression. But quite a lot of the time, we'll find, no, what the student is bringing to this problem is the result of their past learning, and they're kind of blocked. They're not actually, the self is not at the helm. They're not dealing with it they're not engaging with it in this very particular way, which will enable them to learn. And that's also very useful for us to be able to see, first of all, in ourselves, and then once we've seen it in ourselves, see it in our students. Because if I know that my students don't have their self at the helm, when I know they're doing something new, I need to do something about that, because they're not going to learn anything at that moment. So perhaps there's something else to say about, I mean, we're talking about the self and the psyche, or these dual process models of the mind. obviously, again, these are only important and worthwhile, these ideas, if one actually finds this within oneself. Because if as soon as you find it within yourself, but that sometimes I'm in contact with the world in this way, sometimes in this other way, then you'll start recognizing it in the students you have. So one aspect of this, which has always pleased me when I first came across it, and I think pleases other people, is the realization that I think certainly all the languages that I'm aware of actually capture this different way of engaging with the world in their actual vocabulary. So in English, we talk about seeing something. He's talking about the visual sense. One can see something or one looks. And seeing is absolutely the psyche, or in Kahneman, in the dual process models of the mind, it's the system one way of using the visual sense, whereas looking is the self engaging with something, which is system two in the dual process models of the mind nomenclature. And similarly, one goes through all the senses, and you have a similar thing. So with audition, one has listening and one has hearing. And in one case, what's happened when one is hearing, for example, is one is recognizing things that one has already experienced. To a large extent, one is just experiencing again and recognizing what's going on. Whereas when one is listening, one is actually trying to work out what's different, what's going on here. Can I discover something new involved in his here? So the fact that language has embedded this dual process model of the mind within it, I think speaks strongly for the fact that there is a genuine psychological reality behind this. And it's one which is worth recognizing ourselves and then discovering in our students in front of us.
And in English is rather special in this respect, because it has, in the present, it has two tenses, one of which is the general tense, right? What people call the present simple, which is every day I do this. Now, this is very much the psyche tense as well. I don't have to think about this. Every day I get up at 7 o'clock and I have breakfast, I have coffee, I have whatever I have, and then I go to work, and all of these things. This is my psyche functioning. And then there's this tense, which is the present continuous, which is the self tense. This is what I'm interested in. Right? This is what I'm spending my time on at the moment. I'm learning Greek, or I'm learning to do this or that, and these are what my engagements, my immediate engagements are. And this is why it's a tense which can be very limited in time, because it's what myself is involved in at the moment, and this is what is going to change me. And then all of that, of course, will then be part of my psyche, and so I love to think about that. Many languages don't make this distinction, but English does. Yes.